Hey guys, tonight we're going to tap gently through the foggy gaslamp glow of Victorian England, where, believe it or not, people once thought typewriters could cure insomnia. Yes, that clunky, metal-fanged machine sitting in your grandpa's attic. That thing was considered high-tech bedtime therapy. So prepare yourself, because what you're about to learn might be the dullest, most delightful thing you've heard all day, and no promises you'll stay awake through the end. Picture this: you're sitting in a small, cramped study at the back of a townhouse in 1885 London. The wallpaper is peeling in one corner, the fireplace glows faintly behind you, and the air smells like ink, old books, and faint coal smoke. The kind of place where time creaks along slowly, like the floorboards under your slippers. On the desk in front of you, an imposing, jet-black Remington typewriter sits like a mechanical beetle, all levers and teeth. A cup of lukewarm chamomile tea rests at your elbow. Outside, the rain whispers against the windowpane, and yet, here you are, tapping keys into the night. That's right. You're not working. You're not writing your memoirs. You're typing. To fall asleep, Victorian society, for all its corsets and candlelight, had a secret dread: sleeplessness. And the upper classes in particular were absolutely terrified of lying awake, staring at the ceiling, letting their minds spiral into madness. Overstimulation of the mind, they called it. Probably what we now call doom-scrolling. The idea that the rhythmic clatter of a typewriter could quiet the mind wasn't entirely random. The Victorians had a bit of a fetish for machines that made noise: ticking clocks, whirring fans, even gently clanking radiators. White noise before it had a name. The typewriter, with its soothingly repetitive click-clack, was just hypnotic enough to do the trick. Or so they hoped. Mainstream fact. The first commercially successful typewriter, the Scholes and Glidden model, launched in the 1870s and quickly gained traction, especially among writers and clerks. But by the 1880s, it had begun creeping into private homes. And once that happened, people started getting creative with its uses. Very creative. You start slowly, as advised in the Guide to Mechanical Sleep Remedies. Yes, that was a real pamphlet. One finger, then two, then a full hand. You're not trying to write anything. In fact, the point is to not think. You might just type a simple phrase over and over: the night is soft, the clock is kind, I am very tired, until the words lose their meaning entirely and you're left with pure rhythm. A kind of analog mantra, tapped out on brass and ink. There's something almost meditative about the repetition. Your mind drifts. The world narrows to the pressure under your fingers, the tactile thunk of keys bouncing back. No screens. No alerts. Just you and the machine, speaking in quiet staccato. One fringe belief at the time claimed that typewriters could reset the body's neural harmonics. Basically, your brain was like a harp, and the keys were the tuning fork. Sounds made sense to them. They thought sound had shapes, patterns, healing energy. To be fair, it's not that far off from people today sleeping to lo-fi playlists or rain on window loops. Just with way more gears. But historians still argue whether Victorians genuinely believed in the medical potential of these machines, or if it was just another excuse to justify staying up alone, doing something that looked productive. You pause. Shift in your chair. The springs groan. Somewhere outside, a carriage rattles past on cobblestones, and the horse's hooves echo softly, like punctuation to your thoughts. You think about the strange optimism of that era. The way they trusted machines to solve things humans couldn't. Steam trains to conquer distance. Telegraphs to conquer silence. Typewriters to conquer insomnia. And maybe, just maybe, that soft clicking was the only thing keeping someone sane at 2 a.m. in a world before melatonin and mindfulness apps. The warmth of the fireplace seeps into your spine. Your shoulders soften. The phrase on your page is now just one long line of repeated vowels. A lullaby in mechanical form. You wonder how many others sat like this: Londoners, Parisians, New Yorkers. Dozens, hundreds. all believing that the key to sleep was to keep typing. Not until you finished something. Just until your brain finally gave up the fight. A mild joke among the sleepless elite: the pen is mightier than the sword, but the typewriter is quieter than the thoughts. No one really laughed out loud. Just nodded, with bags under their eyes, and so you sit a little longer. The room grows darker. The lamp flickers once. You let your hands fall to your lap. The machine stares back, quiet now. Still. As if it, too, is ready for rest. The keys click again, almost reluctantly, like they too are trying to stay awake. You place your fingertips on the smooth round buttons, some worn smooth, others still sharp-edged, and begin again. This time it's not a mantra. Maybe just a letter to no one. Or a grocery list for a breakfast you'll never make. You're not here for the words. You're here for the rhythm. Somewhere in the 1880s, a curious little theory started popping up in dusty medical journals and after-dinner salons, that typewriting might actually help soothe the brain, much like rocking chairs or metronomes. The idea wasn't wildly outlandish for the time. Victorians were obsessed with all things mechanical, and equally obsessed with nerves. Not just being nervous, but literal nervous energy. They believed your nerves could be overexcited by modern life, city noise, bad novels, or, heaven forbid, coffee, and so, came the prescription: rhythmic, purposeful movement. Not strenuous like calisthenics, and not passive like sitting under a tree. Something in between. Something just boring enough to hush the chaos upstairs. The typewriter became a surprise candidate. Doctors, especially the ones who called themselves nerve specialists, which sounds made up but was absolutely real, started recommending it for people with agitated minds. One early case involved a young solicitor in Bath who couldn't sleep for weeks. According to notes found in his sister's diary, he was instructed to type a summary of each day before bed. No flair. Just facts. Breakfast with Mr. Tilby. Milk bitter. 11:35 train rattled unusually. That sort of thing. The man was asleep within 10 minutes, every night. A mainstream fact for your weary brain. The QWERTY layout, invented around this time, was originally designed not to be fast, but to slow typists down just enough to prevent mechanical jams. And yet, that very deliberate pace may have accidentally made it perfect for lulling you to sleep. The slow mechanical response. The uneven tempo. The need to press firmly. It's like your fingers are doing Tai Chi for insomniacs. Victorian journals are full of odd one-liners like the typewriting machine quiets the inner hum, or its clicks are of the nature of counting sheep, squared. You imagine them scribbled by candlelight, their authors unsure whether they were writing poetry, prescriptions, or just trying to stay awake long enough to test their own theory. But this wasn't just a hobby for the sleepless rich. Typewriters began appearing in doctors' offices. A few even showed up in asylums, repurposed as therapeutic devices, though not without their controversies. Some critics feared that giving unstable minds access to a machine with moving parts and permanent ink was like handing a toddler a hammer and a manifesto. Historians still argue whether the sleep benefits were real or placebo, but the reports are consistent: people typed, people slept. Maybe not always. Maybe not deeply. But enough to get through the night. You shift your position again. The typewriter lets out a creak as if it, too, needs a moment. The paper curls slightly at the edges. Your fingers rest gently on the keys. You imagine the machine like a pet, half asleep itself, ready to purr if nudged. A fringe tidbit: some Victorians believed the typewriter had a kind of passive electrical aura. Not literal electricity, mind you, they didn't mean wires or shocks. They meant presence. That the machine itself gave off a calming field. One overly poetic doctor in Manchester compared sitting near a typewriter to being in the company of a quiet and orderly friend who asks nothing but accepts everything. It's unclear if he was well rested or just deeply lonely. You exhale slowly. The room smells like ink ribbon and old wood. In this moment, the world is reduced to a desk, a chair, and a tool that makes noise just loud enough to drown your thoughts and just quiet enough not to startle you. It's like typing under a blanket, both exposed and wrapped in routine, a tiny scrap of comedy from a letter dated 1884. If I must be tormented by my own racing thoughts, at least let them arrive single-spaced and properly formatted. Click. Click. Pause. The sound of keys is surprisingly nostalgic. Even if you've never used one before, you know it. It's the audio equivalent of walking on gravel or cracking an old book. Something about it tugs at memory. Even when there's nothing specific attached, and maybe that's why it worked. The sound didn't demand attention. It just reminded you that something orderly still existed in the world. That letters still lined up in rows. That your hand still knew what to do. And that if nothing else, you could keep pressing keys until your body stopped caring. Outside, the gaslight flickers. A moth bats clumsily against the window, its wings pattering softly like fingers on keys. Everything wants rest, even the night. You look down at the paper. It's blank again. Or maybe not blank, but unreadable. A collection of letters that might make sense, or might not. It doesn't matter. You weren't writing for anyone but your own overworked neurons. And they, finally, are getting tired. You shift your weight again, ever so slightly, as if your bones might creak louder than the machine. The chair beneath you sighs in protest, and you roll your shoulders with the solemn ceremony of someone trying not to fall asleep, but also kind of hoping they do. Tonight, you're not in a study, but in a classroom. A narrow, wood-floored room above a cobbler's shop, lit by oil lamps and filled with the muted chatter of pressed skirts and calloused fingers. Welcome to one of the first Victorian typing schools, where people didn't just learn a trade, they learned therapy. Or at least, that's what the pamphlet said. Most of the seats are filled by women, many of them young and respectable. Some of them not so much, and all of them exhausted by a world that never seems to stop talking. But here, in this space, they're asked not to talk. Only to type. You settle into the back of the class. The instructor is a stern woman with silver spectacles and a voice like a metronome. She does not believe in wasted movement or wasted words. Begin with the home row, she says, and you hear the staggered chorus of click-clicks rise like a reluctant hymn. Fingers flutter over keys. A few students mistype and frown. No one stops. You don't stop either. The Victorian fascination with typewriting for the nerves extended well beyond the drawing room. Schools like this one sprouted in cities across Britain and America. Not just to teach skill, but to cultivate calm. There was a growing belief that mechanical, repetitive action could redirect the mind from harmful spirals of overthinking. A kind of industrial-era mindfulness, mainstream fact. In the late 19th century, typing schools became especially popular among middle-class women, many of whom were stepping into clerical work for the first time. It was one of the few socially acceptable jobs for a woman outside of teaching or nursing. What surprised many was how it quickly became tied to wellness as much as wages. Typing as tonic, one ad read. Cure your malaise with practiced fingers and productive thought. Was it a job? A ritual? A sleep aid? Historians still argue whether the push toward typing as therapy was a legitimate treatment or just Victorian society's way of giving women something to do that looked useful and sounded quiet. After all, you can't scream if you're typing politely at 30 words per minute. One young woman, Emma Whittaker, wrote in her diary that she typed every evening before bed to soften the internal hum. That phrase again. You're starting to see a pattern. She would practice common business phrases. Enclosed please find, in regard to your inquiry, please remit by Friday, until her brain melted into something resembling peace. Or at least, the absence of dread, and if nothing else, she fell asleep faster. You glance around the classroom. The atmosphere is strangely reverent. The sound of type bars striking paper is like distant rain on a tin roof. It's repetitive without being chaotic, constant without being overwhelming. No wonder some physicians recommended typing instead of opium. A fringe belief floated through these circles, that each keystroke stimulated certain nerves in the fingertips, and that these nerves were connected, somehow, to the heart. The idea was not scientifically sound. But then again, neither is rubbing a crystal on your forehead, and yet here we are, centuries later, still trying things that make no sense but feel right. Some of the women in the class look focused. Some look half asleep. One of them, you notice, has nodded off entirely with her hands still resting on the keys, like a pianist who forgot she wasn't at a concert. The instructor glances at her, and then, surprisingly, does nothing. She lets her rest. Maybe even understands. At the end of the lesson, the instructor dismisses everyone with a slow clap of her hands and a brief recitation from a well-known relaxation manual. A body at work must sometimes pause, not to stop, but to allow the mind to slip quietly into rhythm. Click. You strike one last key, just to hear the sound again. It's different now, less mechanical, more sleepy. You gather your things slowly. The others file out into the foggy street, their footsteps muffled on damp cobblestone. You remain seated just a few seconds longer, letting the moment linger. It's strange how something so small, just pressing little levers in a row, can make the world feel quieter. Calmer. Less sharp around the edges. A joke floats back to you, overheard in the classroom. If you can't find peace in your heart, try finding it in the margins. You smile faintly. Maybe they were onto something. As you walk home, or imagine yourself walking home, the fog closes in like a blanket. Gas lamps flicker along the street. Somewhere, someone plays a music box in the distance, and it mixes with the memory of typewriter clacks until you're not sure which is which. You don't remember unlocking the door. You barely remember sitting down again at your own desk. But the typewriter is still there, waiting. Loyal. Predictable. A very small machine in a very big world. You rest your fingers on the keys, just one more time. Click. The next night, you return to the desk like someone visiting a trusted apothecary, though instead of bitter tonics and smelling salts, you're here for rhythm, for that quiet clatter that keeps the night from caving in on itself. You settle in with a blanket across your lap, a lukewarm biscuit on a saucer nearby, and the unspoken hope that maybe tonight the click-clack will come faster. And sleep with it, but tonight, we're going somewhere a little more uncomfortable, back to the late Victorian medical journals, those musty, overconfident little booklets written mostly by men in wool vests and bad lighting. You flip through the pages with a mental groan, and there it is again, the word hysteria. A term they wielded like a broom, sweeping everything from restlessness to melancholy under its skirt. You begin typing slowly, deliberately, but your mind drifts to the peculiar belief that typewriting could treat hysteria in women. A legitimate theory at the time. At least, according to several London physicians and one very serious-looking man in Birmingham who insisted that the act of repeated mechanical exertion offers the female mind a calming occupation not unlike prayer. Yes. Really, the typewriter became, in some circles, a prescribed activity for women deemed overwrought. Women who talked too much. Who cried without warning. Who were too clever to rest properly. As one nurse wrote, instead of being told to lie down or take a walk, some were handed machines and told to type. Not for work. Not for income. But as a kind of mental metronome, to level out their jagged emotional graph, mainstream fact. In the Victorian era, hysteria was a catch-all diagnosis for symptoms ranging from insomnia to irritability to depression, and it disproportionately targeted women. No two doctors seemed to agree on its cause, but plenty were eager to offer remedies. And so the clack of the typewriter entered the drawing room, not as a tool of communication, but as a kind of mechanical lullaby. A rhythmic purge. A replacement for screaming into a pillow. You resume typing. They believed the focus required to press each key, to align each letter, might anchor the wandering female mind. Even now, the phrase makes your eye twitch. But it's history. A weird, awkward, poorly lit corridor of history where science and sexism shared a cup of weak tea and called it progress. One fringe pamphlet from 1890 even described the typewriter as a correctional device for domestic restlessness. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry at that one. But you keep typing. The story of Lydia Travers comes to mind. She was 28, a teacher turned invalid after a particularly bad spell of what her doctor called emotional weather. Instead of being confined to bed, she was given a typewriter and told to express herself in regulated strokes. She typed nothing but grocery lists and copied passages from cookbooks. Within weeks, her sleep improved. Or so the records say. Historians still argue whether this approach was genuinely therapeutic or just a more palatable form of distraction. Was it healing? Or just a socially acceptable way to keep inconvenient emotions buried under neat columns of text? You let your fingers drift now, forming meaningless phrases. Soft skies and quiet cups. The fog knows my name. Whatever that means. It doesn't matter. The repetition is the real point. You imagine a woman, like Lydia, hunched over her machine by candlelight, eyes heavy, sleeves rolled up just enough to stain with ink. Her world narrowed to the mechanics of press, return, repeat. Maybe she found peace in it. Maybe she just got tired enough to forget she was supposed to be unhappy. You glance out the window, half expecting to see her ghost passing by in a shawl, clutching a ream of blank paper. A small joke from one of the less stodgy physicians: if typing truly cures hysteria, then let us install a Remington at every marriage altar. It got a laugh in the journal, though the editor quietly removed it in the next issue. Even the men weren't entirely immune. One letter to the Journal of Nervous Disorders detailed a case of a young writer with melancholic distraction who cured his sleep issues by transcribing poetry he hated. Something about typing ode to a skylark 15 times made his brain shut down in protest. Sleep came. Sanity returned. Or close enough. You press a key now, and the sound is deeper, like the machine knows it's carrying weight. It's not just pressing buttons anymore. It's translating tension into something manageable. You feel the pressure behind your eyes ease, just slightly. Historians might bicker over the ethics, the effectiveness, the implications, but one thing's clear: there were people who typed themselves to sleep when nothing else worked. Whether they were escaping hysteria, heartbreak, or just a particularly bad batch of tea, the method didn't matter. The rhythm did: click. Click. Spacebar, the room is still. The only movement comes from your fingers. You're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not rehearsing arguments or worrying over missed appointments. You're just here. With keys. With silence. With the echo of Lydia's long-forgotten keystroke somewhere in the back of your mind. And slowly, gently, you feel the night soften. Your hands rest on the keys, palms warm from the faint heat of the lamp beside you. You pause, not because you're finished typing, but because your eyes keep drifting shut between words. The keys are still, waiting, but the sound of their past clicking seems to echo faintly, as if your brain has decided to fill in the rhythm on its own. Tonight, you meet someone who truly believed in this rhythm as medicine. Not a doctor. Not a scientist. Just a woman with a stubborn case of insomnia and a particularly Victorian sense of self-discipline. Her name? Let's call her Clara. Though her real name was lost to time, her story shows up in 3 medical letters and a discarded diary fragment found tucked in a second-hand edition of Sonnets for the Sleepless. Clara was 32, unmarried, and fond of fresh air and strong opinions. She lived alone, already a red flag in 1891, and kept odd hours. Her physician wrote that she was frequently observed pacing about her drawing room past midnight, often muttering lines of verse to herself and refusing tea. The diagnosis? Nervous overactivity. The prescription? A newfangled typewriting machine, to be used precisely 2 hours before bedtime. Clara's instructions were strange: she was to write nothing personal. No letters. No stories. Instead, she was to transcribe the Oxford Almanac, line by line. The point, her doctor claimed, was to dull the emotional cortex and anchor the wandering psyche. Which is a Victorian way of saying, bore yourself to sleep. Mainstream historical fact: the Oxford Almanac was one of the most unreadably dull publications ever printed, hundreds of pages of dates, tides, estate listings, and cathedral measurements. Perfect for insomnia treatment. And Clara was told to type it all, in order, from cover to cover. The first night, she made it 12 minutes. The second, 24. By the fourth night, she was snoring at the machine, her forehead gently resting on the T key. And so, her nightly ritual began. Click-clack. Click-clack. Snooze, her neighbors noted the change. Miss Clarendon, one noted in a letter, is much improved. She no longer recites threats to the moon. High praise, but what fascinated her doctor wasn't just the sleep. It was the manner in which the machine seemed to domesticate her restlessness. Clara wasn't docile by nature. She was clever and bristly, the kind of woman who refused to host tea unless she chose the biscuits herself. But the typewriter, slow, steady, impersonal, offered her a frame, a structure, a rhythm. And within that rhythm, her thoughts quieted. Historians still argue whether Clara's story was a one-off curiosity or part of a wider pattern. Some suggest that many similar cases simply weren't recorded, because they involved women, or because the results were unremarkable, or because the doctors involved were too embarrassed to publish success stories involving office equipment. But Clara wasn't the only one, fringe theory of the time. Some believed that the metal of the typewriter helped conduct excess nervous energy out of the body and into the machine. Like grounding a lightning rod. It was pseudoscience, of course, but it gave anxious minds a metaphor. Something physical. Something you could touch. You glance down at your own machine now, or maybe you're just imagining it, and you wonder if it's still holding some trace of stress from decades ago. If these keys remember. If the ghosts of insomniacs past are tucked between the ribbon and the platen, snoring faintly, you type a little more. Not the almanac. Something easier. I am here. The night is slow. The words are soft. You imagine Clara doing the same, pausing between lines to sip cool water or adjust her shawl. Eventually, she moved on from the almanac. She began typing things she loved, translations of dull poetry, her own weather reports, made-up to-do lists. Her doctor frowned on this, of course, worried that personal content might inflame the imaginative faculties. But Clara knew better. She'd found her own rhythm, a joke she scribbled in the margin of a typed page: if the cure for madness is boredom, then bless the clack. You smile. The kind of smile that comes just before your chin drops forward and your eyelids forget their job. The room is very still. Outside, the wind slips past the shutters like it's trying not to wake you. The paper in the typewriter curls slightly at the edge. And one key, just one, rests slightly off-center, like it too has gotten a bit drowsy. You picture Clara, content now, wrapped in a wool blanket, her fingers relaxed, the typewriter silent at last. You wonder how many others found their way to sleep with nothing more than steady hands and a blank page. Not pills. Not potions. Just metal and willpower. You press one last key, almost ceremonially. It lands with a soft thud that feels more like a sigh than a sound. Click. You're getting used to this now, the strange ceremony of it. The gentle ritual of sitting down at a typewriter, not to produce brilliance, not to write the next great novel, but to slow yourself down. To empty the noise out of your head, one key at a time. You no longer think of the machine as just a tool. It's more like a metronome for your soul, if that isn't too dramatic, which, let's face it, in Victorian times, it absolutely would have been. Tonight, the room is darker. The lamp is low. The corners blur. You find yourself back in a different space now, not a parlor, not a classroom, but an early sleep laboratory, circa 1895. It smells like polished wood and medical ink. A brass clock ticks too loudly in the corner. And a small cot waits in the far end of the room, next to, yes, you guessed it, a typewriter. It's part of an experiment. One of many being run by an enthusiastic, mustache-heavy doctor named Percival Dane, who believed in what he called mechanical surrender therapy. The idea was simple: if you gave the brain a single, harmless task, one just complicated enough to engage it, but not stimulate it, you could trigger sleep, and that task. Typing in complete darkness, mainstream historical fact. By the 1890s, the first formal sleep clinics were being established in Europe, particularly in Germany and the UK. While many of these focused on breathing disorders or night terrors. A few fringe thinkers, like Dr. Dane, were more interested in how machinery could interact with mental exhaustion. Dr. Dane's favorite test subject was himself. He'd sit in total darkness and type single letters, slowly, by memory. No visual cues. No paper. Just the sound and feel of the keys. He believed it redirected nocturnal anxieties into tactile patterns. Translation: if you give your hand something to do, maybe your brain stops throwing a tantrum. You picture him now, hunched over his machine at 2 a.m., surrounded by stacks of notebooks labeled things like experiments in somnolent keystrike number 11. Poor man probably needed a nap more than a theory. Fringe tidbit. Dr. Dane also believed that certain letters were more soothing than others. Vowels, in particular. He once typed the letter O 3,000 times in a row and reported a dreamless, peaceful 5-hour nap. His assistant, on the other hand, tried typing X and was said to have awakened in a disagreeable mood. You're not sure about the science, but it's a great excuse to avoid typing your ex's name. Historians still argue whether any of these experiments produced usable data. Or if they were just the sleep-deprived ramblings of very dedicated nerds. But the records survive. And many of them point to a surprising pattern. When participants typed familiar, meaningless content in a dim room, sleep came faster. Not instantly. But gradually. Like fog rolling in under the door, you give it a try now. No lights. You close your eyes and trust your fingers. You don't care what the words are. You're not even sure if you're hitting the right keys. The point isn't accuracy. It's rhythm. It's repetition. It's letting go. Click. 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 You're a metronome made of flesh and quiet determination. A young woman named Violet, another sleep clinic subject, once described the experience like this: it is as though I am writing without meaning. Yet the body is reassured by the act. She fell asleep with her fingers still moving. Her pages were full of partial words, nonsense strings, and sometimes just long rows of the letter L. You smile. There's something comforting about that. Not needing to make sense. Just needing to move. You press the spacebar a few times, slowly. It makes no sound, but it feels like punctuation for a thought you don't need to finish. The more you type, the less your mind wanders. There are no decisions to make. No words to choose. You're not writing for anyone. Not even yourself. You're just typing. Letting the rhythm sweep the clutter off the mental table. You hear a soft noise in the background. Maybe it's a carriage rolling by. Or the creak of the house settling. Or maybe it's your own heartbeat syncing with the tempo of the keys. Dr. Dane's notes often reference that moment, when the sound of typing becomes internal. When the machine and the mind begin to mirror each other. He called it the quiet consonance. And whether it was real or just poetic, something about it resonates now. You can barely feel your fingers. They're still moving. You're not sure what they're typing. Something about fog, maybe. Or dreams. Or tea. It doesn't matter. There are no mistakes here. A joke one of the other researchers liked to tell: if the mind is a cluttered desk, then the typewriter is a secretary who quietly files your chaos until you drift off in the waiting room. You'd laugh, but you're too tired. The typewriter grows heavier under your hands, not physically, but in the way it begins to feel more like a pillow than a machine. Your thoughts melt. The night stretches long and warm, like a blanket with no edges, and just before sleep claims you, again, you imagine Dr. Dane, sitting alone in the dark. Smiling faintly as his keys whisper him into slumber. Tonight, you come to the typewriter not just for sleep, but for silence. Not the absence of sound, no, the kind of silence that includes sound. The hush of something steady, something mechanical, like rainfall on a tin roof or the rhythmic knock of a train passing over tracks. You lift your fingers to the keys like you're greeting an old friend who doesn't mind that you never say much. The house is still. The clock ticks, but not with urgency. Your teacup is half full, forgotten. You aren't here to write anything. You're just here. Letting your hands follow some forgotten pattern, trusting that the rhythm will do the work for you. That your brain will gradually lose interest and drift. Like a bored child staring out a train window, but now we leave the study again. The world outside still hums along, and in 1898, so does a new phenomenon, typewriting clubs. That's right. People gathered not just to learn typing, but to do it together. Socially. In silence, some called it the Silent Key Society, a name that sounds either oddly elegant or like a Victorian spy ring. Either way, these clubs were spreading across cities like Manchester, Edinburgh, Boston, and even Melbourne. The premise was simple: gather a group of people in a quiet room, give them typewriters, dim the lights, and just type. No goals. No assignments. Just rhythmic mechanical focus, mainstream fact. Typing clubs were indeed real, usually created for professional development. But some were explicitly recreational. As the typewriter craze spread in the 1890s, many enthusiasts sought out others who shared their fascination, especially those who felt soothed by the machine's calming, predictable nature. One member of a London club, Mr. Benjamin Heath, who absolutely sounds like a man with insomnia, wrote that the ambient patter of so many keys in union is, to me, akin to a gentle storm, orderly and tranquil. You picture the scene: 20 or 30 people, seated in rows, heads bent, fingers dancing, no one speaking. The sound is not chaotic, it's layered, harmonious. Like rain on 100 rooftops. And in the middle of it all, someone, maybe you, is drifting slowly into that warm, underwater quiet that comes just before sleep, a fringe detail. One club even promoted shared sleep typing. Members brought blankets and pillows and were encouraged to keep typing as long as they could, then lie down wherever they were. The results? A room filled with half-typed pages and fully asleep humans. The first true group nap, powered by the Remington No. 2, historians still argue whether these clubs were genuinely therapeutic. Or just another example of the Victorian fondness for hobbies with serious faces. They took everything seriously back then: tea, trains, even naps, but even the skeptics had to admit, people who joined these clubs often reported better sleep. Maybe not because of what they typed, but because of how they typed. Together. Quietly. Predictably, you return your focus to your own machine. You're alone, technically, but the echo of that room full of typists seems to hang in the air. You picture yourself there, seated among strangers, each of you lost in your own cadence. It's oddly comforting. No one's watching. No one expects anything. Everyone is simply typing. A soft smile tugs at your lips. It's the kind of calm that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and settles in, like a cat on your lap. You try a pattern you read about once, typing your name, backwards, over and over again. Then forwards. Then alternating. You're not even sure what it's doing, but it distracts you just enough to help everything else fade out. Click. 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 Pause. Return. The typewriter becomes less a machine now, more a meditation bell. Each keystroke is a breath. Each sentence is a path that leads nowhere on purpose. One club in Boston published a newsletter called The Soothing Key, which included slow typing exercises, suggested nonsense passages to copy, and reader letters about their best naps. One favorite. After 17 minutes of typing the phrase, "The curtains whisper quietly," I awoke refreshed and unsure what day it was. Success. You try it now. The curtains whisper quietly. Over and over. It doesn't take long before your mind detaches from the meaning. It becomes shapes, then sound, then nothing, somewhere in the margins of your mind. A joke floats by: join a typing club. It's like a choir, but quieter, and no one has to wear shoes. You chuckle, Barely. Just air through your nose. The room is very still. Your shoulders have melted downward. You're slouched now, not like someone who's lazy, but like someone who's safe. And the keys beneath your fingers feel like stepping stones across a slow, shallow stream, the words on the page. You don't remember them. You don't care. They were never the point was being here. With the sound. With the rhythm. With the ghostly echo of a dozen clubs full of strangers, all typing their way toward dreams. Click. Click. Pause, you linger longer between each keystroke now, as if your fingers are negotiating with your brain for one more minute of wakefulness. The night wraps tighter, and the space around you softens until the only thing that feels truly real is the slow, familiar clack of metal on paper. Not a story. Not even a thought. Just motion. Tonight, you drift further, into something more peculiar. Imagine a room. Not a parlor, not a sleep lab, but a spa. Yes, a Victorian health spa, but not the cucumber on ice kind. This is the 1901 version, a place of steam rooms, tonic water, faint smells of camphor, and, oddly enough, typewriters. Welcome to the Balmoral retreat for nervous ladies. Nestled on a misty hillside in Yorkshire. It promised tranquility, mild exercise, and restorative routine. And one of its prized features. The typing room, mainstream fact, health retreats in the late Victorian and Edwardian periods were hugely popular, especially for the upper class who could afford to take the waters for weeks at a time. While most were focused on mineral baths, some more experimental retreats added mind-body activities, including typewriting, as part of their nervous wellness regimens. At Balmoral, the rules were strict. No letters. No novels. No creative writing of any kind. You were assigned pages, often from old encyclopedia entries, and instructed to copy them slowly. Methodically, while seated in a plush, velvet-cushioned chair. Each session lasted exactly 40 minutes, guests reported mild euphoria, soft hallucinations of waterfalls, and, in more than one case, full-on drooling mid-sentence. A fringe story from Balmoral, one heiress, Lady Cecily Haversham, became so fond of the practice that she had a traveling sleep desk made, a lacquered wooden case with a fold-out typewriter, silk pillow, and miniature footstool. She claimed it calmed the night spirits when she stayed in unfamiliar homes. To be fair, if you've ever tried sleeping in a Victorian manor full of taxidermy and drafty corridors, you might also want your own bedtime machine. Historians still argue whether these typing rituals had real effect or were simply bougie busywork, but even the skeptics admit there's something oddly effective about creating a private, tactile world before bed. A space where no one expects anything clever. Just precision. Just pace. You try it now, you type the name of something boring. Granite. Then you describe it. Granite is a coarse-grained igneous rock. Again. Granite is a coarse-grained igneous rock. Again. Your fingers move. Your mind doesn't care. And that's the point. You're Lady Haversham now, lounging in a velvet robe, faint scent of lavender in the air, typing the word sedimentary until your thoughts erode into sediment of their own, and then the machine jams. Just slightly. One key catches on another, you pause, there's a brief mechanical protest, like your typewriter is tired too. You lift the cover gently and fix it with a soft click. You exhale, as if you've just soothed a cranky pet. And in a way, you have. Your machine thanks you by behaving again. And so you resume. There's something deeply human about machines that don't work perfectly. Victorian typewriters jammed often, especially when used gently. Unlike modern keyboards, which expect speed and punishment, these older machines rewarded deliberate movement. Press too fast. It jams. Too hard. The ink smears. Too slow. Nothing happens. It demanded your attention, just enough to distract you from whatever existential dread had been stealing your sleep. One therapist at Balmoral, Mrs. Lenore Gladwin, with a spectacularly oversized hat, called it calibrated thinking. Not quite mindfulness. Not quite meditation. But something in between. She said, the brain, when tethered to a gentle chore, remembers itself. A bit dramatic, but it stuck. You wonder how many other sleep seekers sat where you now imagine yourself, shoulders slumped, lashes low, typing the words coral reef ecosystems for the 50th time until their minds slipped beneath their own waves. One former guest even wrote, the words became my lullaby. Not their meaning, but their beat. Like counting sheep, if the sheep were trained stenographers. You blink slowly. Your own screen, well, paper, is half full of nonsense now. A mix of geological phrases, maybe one or two invented words. You type plutonic intrusion, and chuckle softly. Sounds like something you'd need ointment for. The machine clicks again. You return the carriage, you don't care that it's nonsense. You don't care that it's boring. In fact, that's the whole point, the repetition soothes something primal. Your pulse slows. The room shrinks until there's nothing left but fingers, keys, and the gentle encouragement of a machine that never rushes you. One last key, click, and then silence. The typewriter waits, ready for the next entry. Or the next dream. The room around you has settled into a kind of invisible hum. Not a sound exactly, more of a presence. The kind that only arrives late at night when even the creaks in the floorboards start whispering instead of groaning. You breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, and let your fingers find their place again on the keys. Tonight, we find ourselves inside something altogether more intimate, a bedroom, circa 1903. A private ritual. Not part of any club. No doctors nearby. No spa slippers. Just one insomniac and her typewriter, every single night, without fail. Her name was Mrs. Arabella Kent, and she called her practice night stitching. Not with thread, but with words. She believed that by sewing the same sentence over and over onto paper, she could stitch her restless thoughts shut like a bursting seam. Arabella was a widow, 47 years old, and had lived alone in a narrow townhouse for the better part of a decade. She wasn't sick. She wasn't even sad. But she could not, for the life of her, fall asleep without her nightly typewriting ritual. Mainstream fact, by the early 1900s, typewriters were increasingly present in private homes, not just offices. As literacy rose and women took more roles in secretarial work, the machines often followed them back into domestic spaces, where they sometimes transformed into personal companions rather than tools of labor. Arabella kept hers at the foot of her bed on a roll-top writing desk. Each night, she would light a single lamp, adjust her chair, and type one of only 3 pre-written affirmations. I am no longer worried about the day. The night belongs to me. Sleep will arrive when it is ready. She'd type them again. And again. And again. For 20 minutes. Sometimes 30. Sometimes until the lamp burned out. And always, she would fall asleep within minutes of stopping. Historians still argue whether Arabella's case is meaningful or just a charming footnote in a very long book about people doing strange things to trick their brains. But even skeptics admit, there's something elegant about her process. Something honest, because Arabella wasn't writing for anything. Not a publication. Not a paycheck. Not even a diary. She wrote purely for rhythm. For reassurance. Like a lullaby she sang with her fingertips, fringe belief of the time. Some spiritualists thought the act of repetitive typing could become a form of invocation, a way to draw benevolent sleep spirits into the room through consistent motion and focused intent. Arabella, who had several crystal vials on her nightstand, likely did not believe this. You try it now. I am no longer worried about the day. You type it slowly. One word at a time. Not to memorize it. Not to publish it. Just to let it settle. The sentence spreads across the page like a yawn you didn't mean to feel. Again, the night belongs to me. You say it quietly in your head as your fingers find each letter. This time, the words sound more convincing. Less like a command. More like a truth. One more time, sleep will arrive when it is ready. You imagine Arabella whispering that line to herself as she peeled off her slippers and curled under a hand-stitched quilt, the keys still faintly echoing behind her closed eyes. It's not magic. It's not medicine. But it is effective. There's comfort in declaring that you are no longer in control. That sleep isn't a fight, but a guest who arrives only when the house is quiet enough. Arabella never remarried. She never published a book. But she did, in fact, keep all her typed affirmations in a lacquered box labeled Completed Evenings. Hundreds of sheets. All saying the same things. All evidence of someone who learned that rhythm, not resolution, was the key to sleep. And maybe she was right. You pause now and glance around your own space. No lace curtains. No velvet wallpaper. But the spirit of Arabella lingers. In the quiet. In the repetition. In the humble magic of pressing the same words again and again until you believe them, a light joke she wrote once in the margin: if the Lord giveth sleep, he probably does so in courier typeface. You smile, faintly, then, instinctively, you type it again: I am no longer worried about the day. Click, the night belongs to me. Click, sleep will arrive when it is ready. And slowly, your fingers stop. Not out of fatigue, but out of permission, the sentence hangs there. Still. Unmoving, and so do you. You don't even open your eyes before you press the first key tonight. Your fingers already know the path. You're not fully awake, not fully asleep, just floating in that odd little gap where time slows and meaning thins. The page is waiting, as always. But you aren't here for the words. You're here for the act. The tiny ceremony. You let your hands take over. They know the dance. Click, click, click. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on something stranger than typewriting clubs or spa routines or nightly affirmations. Tonight, we enter the world of noctographic typing, a very real practice among late 19th century inventors and sleep theorists who believed that typing in your sleep could reveal the inner workings of the subconscious mind. Yes, you heard that right. Sleep typing. Like sleepwalking, but with punctuation. Mainstream historical fact: a few eccentric researchers in the 1890s began exploring ways to capture dream thoughts through mechanical means. While phonographs and hypnagogic journaling got more attention, a niche group focused on using typewriters as dream catchers. They believed that by placing a typewriter near the bed, sometimes even on it, and allowing the sleeper to subconsciously engage with it, one might discover hidden insights. A fringe theory. One Mr. Harmon Elbridge, insomnia enthusiast, amateur psychologist, and furniture maker, created a modified typewriter in 1896 designed for mid-dream dictation. It had larger keys, a padded base, and a faintly glowing carriage return. He named it the Revergraph, which sounds like a steampunk lie but was, in fact, patented. Mr. Elbridge claimed to have sleep-typed hundreds of pages over 2 years. Most were gibberish. A few repeated phrases showed up over and over: light beneath the stairs, wool and fire, and one unsettling entry typed 47 times. You already knew this. Historians still argue whether Elbridge actually typed in his sleep or just dozed off while doing automatic writing, which was also popular among spiritualists at the time. Either way, his notes reveal a curious phenomenon: sleep-deprived minds, when gently tasked with repetition, often slide into trance-like states, somewhere between conscious effort and unconscious murmuring. You don't need to believe in ghosts to understand that feeling. You're in it now. Your fingers are moving, your mind is somewhere else. Not gone. Just far enough away to let the body take over. It's not dreaming. It's coasting. You try your own version of a Revergraph entry: the kettle is not warm but it sings anyway. That's nonsense. But somehow, it feels right. You type it again: the kettle is not warm but it sings anyway. There's a rhythm to it. A sleepy, slow rhythm. It doesn't matter what it means. You picture Harmon Elbridge in his creaky study, dozing upright with a blanket over his lap, keys faintly tapping as if they had their own thoughts to confess. He believed the typewriter had memory. Not just mechanical memory, but emotional memory. That every keystroke left behind a kind of echo. A hum. A mood, you're not sure if that's true, but the idea feels right in this moment. Click, spacebar, click, you wonder what your own subconscious would type if left unattended. Grocery lists from dreams. Forgotten arguments from last year. A single word stretched across the page like a whisper left in the dark. You don't know. You don't care. You're just letting the motion carry you. Another example, a woman named Genevieve Mallory, who kept a typewriter beside her bed for dream reporting. She'd wake at odd hours, still groggy, and type whatever she remembered. One page read only, too many spoons. The table had too many spoons. Another read, Mother said the garden was upside down again. Is that insight? Is it nonsense? Historians still debate the value of sleep writing, but they do agree on one thing: typing while tired tends to quiet the editor in your mind. That pesky little inner critic goes to bed before you do, and when it's gone, you're free to type without judgment. You do it now, no grammar, no rules. The cat knows something I don't. The windows blink too slowly. I would like to be a rug. Rugs don't worry. Your fingers press on, amused but undeterred. Each sentence lands like a heavy eyelid, the room leans gently to one side, or maybe that's just your body. Your breathing is slow. Measured. Like the return of the carriage. Like the space between thoughts. There's a comfort in nonsense. A softness in absurdity. It wraps around you like a dream coat, worn, patchy, but warm. You picture Harmon again, waking in the morning to pages full of gibberish and muttering, well, at least it wasn't blank. There's a lesson in that. In showing up to the keys, whether your mind has anything coherent to say or not, click, you stop, not because you're done, but because there's nowhere left to go. You don't even open your eyes before you press the first key tonight. Your fingers already know the path. You're not fully awake, not fully asleep, just floating in that odd little gap where time slows and meaning thins. The page is waiting, as always. But you aren't here for the words. You're here for the act. The tiny ceremony, you let your hands take over. They know the dance, click, click, click. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on something stranger than typewriting clubs or spa routines or nightly affirmations. Tonight, we enter the world of noctographic typing, a very real practice among late 19th century inventors and sleep theorists who believed that typing in your sleep could reveal the inner workings of the subconscious mind. Yes, you heard that right. Sleep typing. Like sleepwalking, but with punctuation, mainstream historical fact. A few eccentric researchers in the 1890s began exploring ways to capture dream thoughts through mechanical means. While phonographs and hypnagogic journaling got more attention, a niche group focused on using typewriters as dream catchers. They believed that by placing a typewriter near the bed, sometimes even on it, and allowing the sleeper to subconsciously engage with it, one might discover hidden insights. A fringe theory. One Mr. Harmon Elbridge, insomnia enthusiast, amateur psychologist, and furniture maker, created a modified typewriter in 1896 designed for mid-dream dictation. It had larger keys, a padded base, and a faintly glowing carriage return. He named it the Revergraph, which sounds like a steampunk lie but was, in fact, patented. Mr. Elbridge claimed to have sleep-typed hundreds of pages over 2 years. Most were gibberish. A few repeated phrases showed up over and over: light beneath the stairs, woolen fire, and one unsettling entry typed 47 times. You already knew this. Historians still argue whether Elbridge actually typed in his sleep or just dozed off while doing automatic writing, which was also popular among spiritualists at the time. Either way, his notes reveal a curious phenomenon: sleep-deprived minds, when gently tasked with repetition, often slide into trance-like states, somewhere between conscious effort and unconscious murmuring. You don't need to believe in ghosts to understand that feeling. You're in it now. Your fingers are moving, your mind is somewhere else. Not gone. Just far enough away to let the body take over. It's not dreaming. It's coasting, You try your own version of a revergraph entry: the kettle is not warm but it sings anyway. That's nonsense. But somehow it feels right. You type it again: the kettle is not warm but it sings anyway. There's a rhythm to it. A sleepy, slow rhythm. It doesn't matter what it means. You picture Harmon Elbridge in his creaky study, dozing upright with a blanket over his lap, keys faintly tapping as if they had their own thoughts to confess. He believed the typewriter had memory. Not just mechanical memory, but emotional memory. That every keystroke left behind a kind of echo. A hum. A mood. You're not sure if that's true, but the idea feels right in this moment. Click, spacebar, click. You wonder what your own subconscious would type if left unattended. Grocery lists from dreams. Forgotten arguments from last year. A single word stretched across the page like a whisper left in the dark. You don't know. You don't care. You're just letting the motion carry you. Another example: a woman named Genevieve Mallory, who kept a typewriter beside her bed for dream reporting. She'd wake at odd hours, still groggy, and type whatever she remembered. One page read only: too many spoons. The table had too many spoons. Another read: Mother said the garden was upside down again. Is that insight? Is it nonsense? Historians still debate the value of sleepwriting, but they do agree on one thing: typing while tired tends to quiet the editor in your mind. That pesky little inner critic goes to bed before you do, and when it's gone, you're free to type without judgment. You do it now: no grammar, no rules. The cat knows something I don't. The windows blink too slowly. I would like to be a rug. Rugs don't worry. Your fingers press on, amused but undeterred. Each sentence lands like a heavy eyelid. The room leans gently to one side, or maybe that's just your body. Your breathing is slow. Measured. Like the return of the carriage. Like the space between thoughts. There's a comfort in nonsense. A softness in absurdity. It wraps around you like a dream coat, worn, patchy, but warm. You picture Harmon again, waking in the morning to pages full of gibberish and muttering, well, at least it wasn't blank. There's a lesson in that. In showing up to the keys, whether your mind has anything coherent to say or not. Click, you stop, not because you're done, but because there's nowhere left to go. You press a single key and let it echo a little longer than necessary. It feels heavier now, less like machinery and more like some old, loyal animal that understands you. The room doesn't move. Time barely shifts. But your thoughts do. They melt at the edges. Tonight, you're not just typing for sleep, you're typing to disappear, into the rhythm, into the past, into someone else's strange little habit that, somehow, has become yours. Tonight, we drift into the curious tale of Frederick Loom, a railway station clerk who in 1904 developed his own private system of mechanical meditation that he dubbed the tethered mind method. Frederick had a problem. His job involved long hours, strict schedules, and far too many bells. By the end of each day, his ears rang and his nerves sparked like crossed wires. He couldn't rest. He couldn't read. He could barely eat. But someone, perhaps a fellow clerk or an unusually helpful aunt, suggested he take up typing. Not as a hobby. As a treatment. So Frederick brought home a battered Blickensderfer No. 5 and set it on his nightstand. Mainstream historical fact: Blickensderfer typewriters were among the first portable machines marketed to clerks, travelers, and home users. Smaller than the hulking Remingtons, they had a distinct rotating type wheel and were unusually quiet, perfect for late-night use in tiny apartments. Frederick didn't type letters. He typed numbers. Hundreds and hundreds of numbers. Starting from 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, he typed slowly, with care, returning the carriage manually every 10 lines. No skipping. No errors. He called it tethering. He believed the act of grounding his thoughts to a single, unchanging sequence allowed his mind to detach safely, without spiraling. Numbers were orderly. Numbers never judged. Fringe tidbit. Frederick once claimed the number 864 made him instantly drowsy. He never explained why. Some scholars later suggested it was a kind of personal mantra, or perhaps just the moment when his body gave up and accepted the inevitable. Historians still argue whether this method was innovative or just extremely boring. Some liken it to modern CBT techniques. Others dismiss it as obsessive behavior masquerading as self-care. But the point, really, isn't whether it was revolutionary. The point is, it worked. Frederick wrote in his journal, "The numbers are gentle company. They ask nothing. They simply continue. You try it now, 26, 27, 28, it's oddly satisfying. The sequence gives shape to your breath. Each keystroke becomes a metronome. Each return carriage feels like a nod, 46, 47, 48, you stop. Not from boredom. From peace." Frederick never shared his method widely. It was too strange. Too personal. But over time, he added small variations, sometimes typing backwards, sometimes typing only even numbers, sometimes alternating numerals with the days of the week, Monday 1, Tuesday 2, Wednesday 3, and so on. He called this pattern nesting. Creating familiar loops to hold his brain like a soft cage. You type your own, 1 red, 2 blue, 3 green, 4 red, colors and numbers. Like a child's puzzle. And somehow, it's comforting. The mind, when stripped of urgency, often reverts to patterns. It doesn't want creativity. Not at this hour. It wants rhythm. Predictability. It wants to trace its fingers across the wallpaper of repetition until sleep pulls it gently backward. Frederick once said, "The numbers don't care what I feel. And that's the nicest thing about them." You chuckle. Softly. Eyes half closed, some of his pages survived, tucked in the back of a station ledger. Row after row of digits, some smudged with what might have been tea, or tears, or, most likely, ink from an exhausted ribbon. The last page reads simply, "I got to 3217. I do not remember stopping." Neither will you. You type one more number, 129, and you let the next one stay unwritten. The number lingers, 129, you don't type the next one. You just let the keys rest, your fingers hovering like they've forgotten what they were doing. Maybe they have. You blink once, slowly, and feel the soft drag of time around your eyelids. The moment stretches. Then dissolves, the typewriter waits. So do you, but tonight, something shifts. We leave the comfort of rituals and repetition and drift, carefully, into a different chamber of this strange Victorian tale, resistance, because not everyone believed that typewriters belonged anywhere near a bedroom. In fact, some people were absolutely convinced that using one after dark would ruin you. Yes, welcome to the anxious warnings of the Anti-Mechanical Sleep League. Mainstream historical fact, in 1906, a small but vocal group of physicians and moral guardians began publishing articles warning against the nocturnal use of mechanized writing instruments, claiming it could overstimulate the nerves, weaken the spine, and disrupt the natural rhythm of dream cycles. Their concern? That artificial movement, even something as small as typing, was keeping the modern mind too awake. One of the leading voices, Dr. Crispin Rowe, who published a pamphlet titled The Silent Assault, on the Madness of the Midnight Machine. It featured dramatic headings like Insomnia by Iron and the Wreckage of the Female Frame. Over the top. Obviously. But people believed him. At least, a few did. Fringe claim from the pamphlet. One woman was allegedly found in a fugue state of ink, typing Latin verbs into her mattress after staying up too many nights copying poetry. The story was probably fictional. Or, at best, wildly exaggerated. But it stuck. Historians still argue whether the anti-typing panic was rooted in genuine medical concern, or if it was, let's be honest, a bit of late Victorian hand-wringing over women having agency, time alone, and access to machines they could operate without supervision. Because here's a fun fact, a lot of the fear centered around women typing at night. Alone. In their bedrooms, too much independence. Too much unsupervised expression. It rattled the patriarchy, so naturally, some women typed even more. You lean back and imagine the rebellion, a woman in 1907, lips pursed in quiet defiance, curling into her chaise with a pot of tea, her lamp turned low, and her fingers dancing across the keys at 11:48 p.m. Not to produce anything. Just to own the hour, she types a grocery list. Then a nonsense rhyme. Then a letter to no one. You're her now, or maybe you're the one hiding your typewriter under a quilted dust cover, pretending to be asleep while the rest of the house snores. Then gently uncovering it like some secret portal the minute the coast is clear, you try it, the moon is not a threat. You type it softly. It doesn't mean anything, not really. But it feels like an answer to something unspoken. The lamp and I are in agreement. Again, the noise outside is none of my concern. Again, it's not writing. It's spell work. There's something quietly powerful about creating motion when the world expects stillness. Of refusing to lie perfectly still when your mind craves rhythm. The anti-typing voices feared that. Because what is a woman with a typewriter at midnight, if not someone unwilling to be told when and how to rest? Click. Click. Pause. You shift slightly. The air feels warmer. Or maybe you've just melted deeper into the cushion. The pages pile up, not with work, not with meaning, but with resistance disguised as calm. Even now, some part of you enjoys the quiet defiance of it. Staying up, yes, but softly. Typing, yes, but not for anyone, and still, the voice of Dr. Rowe echoes faintly. The midnight machine corrodes the feminine frame. You sigh, the only thing corroding right now is your will to stay awake. You pause, close your eyes. When you open them, you're still there. So is the machine. Waiting. Not judging, because the typewriter was never the threat. It was the tool. The anchor. The soft, click-clacking ferry between wakefulness and rest. You type one more thing. Just for you, I am allowed to be awake. And I am allowed to sleep. And then you let your hands fall still. The carriage doesn't return this time, you just sit there, hands resting on the cool metal frame, like you're holding a sleeping animal that purrs when touched. The air has turned syrupy. Thicker. Each breath feels a little slower than the last, and even your thoughts now seem to travel in a lazy, looping path. The room is silent, but not empty. It holds the quiet hum of pages written, sentences repeated, numbers typed, nonsense whispered into keys. Every tap you've made so far has filled it with something invisible. You could float in it, and now we drift into one of the final oddities of this sleepy history, the short-lived but incredibly earnest field of typotherapeutics. Yes, that's right. Typing. As medicine, mainstream historical fact, between 1908 and 1914, several doctors in Britain and the US experimented with prescribed typewriting exercises as a form of treatment for insomnia, anxiety, mental restlessness, and even grief. It wasn't widespread, but it was real enough to show up in journals like The Lancet and the Boston Medical Weekly. One pioneer in this bizarre but oddly soothing field was Dr. Esther Bellwright, a London-based physician who believed insomnia was often caused not by an overactive mind, but by an underengaged body. Her solution? Gentle tasks that gave the brain just enough to do without overstimulating it, so she prescribed typing. Fringe tidbit, she even created a custom booklet for her patients called 12 Sleepy Sequences, which included oddly poetic exercises like, type the names of rivers you've never visited. List all the spices in your kitchen from memory. Describe the feeling of cold socks in July. You try it now, the Nile. The Danube. The Hudson. The Mekong, paprika. Clove. Star anise. Turmeric, cold socks in July, they crunch like wet towels and smell faintly of betrayal. Okay, maybe you're having too much fun. Historians still argue whether Dr. Bellwright's practice was revolutionary or just a clever placebo. But her patients reported something interesting, not necessarily better sleep every night, but a change in the way they approached sleep. typing reframed bedtime. It made it active. Gentle. Tactile. Instead of lying in the dark with spinning thoughts, her patients had a thing they could do. And even better, a thing that eventually didn't need to be finished. You picture one of them now, an elderly man named Mr. Geoffrey Tull, who once wrote, "I no longer try to win at sleep. I type until I forget what I'm doing. And that's when it finds me." You type that quote now. Just to feel it in your own fingers. I type until I forget what I'm doing. And that's when it finds me. It's oddly beautiful. And true, because sleep, when chased, runs. But sleep, when invited gently by soft clicking and repetition, sometimes just shows up. Dr. Bellwright had another theory, too. She believed that for many people, insomnia came from unexpressed noise, thoughts that had nowhere to go, nowhere to settle. Her prescriptions were designed to give those thoughts a space. A channel. A beat. She didn't want patients writing novels. She wanted them typing sentences like, "The lettuce looked suspicious today," until they no longer cared what the sentence meant. You try one now, "My dreams have ants in them. But they're polite." Another, "The chair understands more than it lets on." And one more, "Just because it feels right, I am not alone when I am typing." Because that's the secret, isn't it? You're not alone, you're joined by everyone who ever sat at a machine like this, chasing rest one keystroke at a time. You're joined by Arabella and Frederick and Harmon and Genevieve and all the nameless typists who turned repetition into comfort and boredom into balm. You're part of a tradition. A sleepy lineage of people who believed that even the most mundane machine could be a bridge into rest, if you just approached it the right way. Click, the carriage moves, but your body doesn't. You're soft now. Folded. The kind of relaxed that feels like velvet inside your bones. You glance at your page. It's a mess. A beautiful one, and somehow, it feels like progress. You don't know how long you've been typing anymore. Time has gone soft. Loose around the edges. Like an old sock or a forgotten memory. The letters on the page have stopped mattering. They blur. You blink slowly, and the whole sheet swims like a puddle in moonlight, and tonight, we arrive at perhaps the strangest twist in this already strange tale, the idea that typewriters could be trained to induce sleep, like pets or music boxes. No, not magic. Not hypnosis, but a kind of mechanical conditioning, where your brain would associate the tactile rhythm of typing with winding down, the same way it might link lavender with baths or lullabies with babyhood. Mainstream historical fact, early behavioral psychologists in the 1910s and 1920s were deeply interested in environmental cues and sleep behavior. Pavlov was studying conditioned reflexes. Watson was experimenting with behavior shaping. And a small but committed group of thinkers began applying this to sleep rituals using machines. Enter Professor Linus Cadwell, an eccentric American researcher who proposed a novel theory, that repetitive typing sequences, if performed nightly in low light and quiet surroundings, could rewire the brain to enter a hypnagogic state on command. He called it the machine lull. Fringe tidbit. Cadwell insisted that the brand of typewriter mattered. He swore by the Royal Model 10, claiming its keystroke resistance was neither too jarring nor too limp. He also claimed that eating one square of dark chocolate exactly 5 minutes before typing primed the frontal cortex for surrender. Most of his peers, naturally, thought he was completely unhinged. Historians still argue whether Cadwell's work had any scientific merit, but he did collect dozens of testimonials from people who claimed his method worked. Night after night, they would sit in the same chair, type the same nonsense, and report falling asleep within minutes of stopping. Cadwell's most famous student was a tailor's apprentice named Lewis Green, who suffered from violent night terrors and chronic sleepwalking. But after 3 months of machine lull training, Lewis reported that he no longer left his bed. Instead, he would type one phrase over and over, "The shadows do not follow me here." He later added, "The keys stay with me, even when I dream." You pause. Type it now, "The shadows do not follow me here." It's not profound. But it's a door. A small, mechanical gate between the waking world and the place where your brain sighs, Cadwell recommended that patients use dim candlelight during typing. He believed too much brightness confused the brain into wakefulness. You switch to a softer light. It makes the keys glow like warm stones, and just for fun, you pop a piece of chocolate, no idea if it helps. But something about the pairing, sweetness and steel, melt and click, feels satisfying. He also insisted on breathing with the carriage return, inhale as you type, exhale as you return, it works, you try a loop, I do not chase sleep. I invite it. Click, again, I do not chase sleep. I invite it. Click, your mind drifts. The words begin to lose meaning. That's the goal. Cadwell wrote that the ideal outcome of machine lull wasn't sleep itself, but the surrendering to it. He said, let the typewriter end the conversation. Your job is only to listen. So now you're listening, to the click. To the hum. To the whisper in the spacebar. To the stillness in your body that says, you don't have to finish this page. You only have to start it. He recommended short, looping phrases. You try a few more, the window is not watching me. Click, the clock can take care of itself. Click, the world is still spinning, even if I'm not. Click, you're heavier now, your neck leans to one side. You don't correct it, there is no done. Only done for now, one final loop, I am not behind. I am not ahead. I am where I am supposed to be. Click, and with that, you stop, the machine does not sigh. It simply waits, and you let your hands fall gently into your lap. You've trained it well, but more importantly, you've trained yourself. The final stretch doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the slow release of a breath you didn't know you were holding. Your hands are warm now. Not from effort, but from presence, from every soft press against the keys, every little nudge that echoed through your fingers and into the silence. Your shoulders drop. You didn't notice they'd risen, and now, we come to the very last chapter of this quietly absurd, wonderfully boring journey, letting go of the machine, because eventually, even the click has to stop. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 1920s, the idea of typewriting as a sleep remedy began to fade. New treatments arrived. Sedatives. Breathing techniques. Electrotherapy. Typewriters slowly returned to their daytime roles, clerks, students, authors. Nighttime typing became more private. More poetic. Less prescriptive, but the ritual lived on in pockets, passed down not as science, but as comfort. Take Annalise Fairweather, a postmistress from Brighton, who continued nightly typing sessions well into the 1940s. Her granddaughter once wrote that Annalise believed the typewriter was a place to think sideways, especially when life made too much sense or not enough. Her favorite phrase, "This is my quiet hour." No goals. No plot. Just tapping and returning. Over and over, until the room dimmed and her pulse slowed and her cat curled beside her feet. Already asleep, fringe tidbit. In 1951, a radio program aired a dramatized reading of her typed bedtime thoughts. It was called The Soft Machine, and it featured nothing but her phrases, read in a monotone voice over the sound of gently clacking keys. People loved it. Some claimed it helped them sleep better than music. Historians still argue whether this practice should be remembered as psychological therapy, creative expression, or merely quaint distraction. But honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel now. Your breath moves on its own. Your spine has settled like dust on a windowsill. You look down at your page. You've typed the same line 3 times without realizing it. I am already on my way. So you stop, not because you must, but because you can, because the ritual is complete, because the rhythm has done its job, and now, gently, softly, as if you're petting something delicate, you close the cover over the typewriter. It clicks into place, not with finality, but with grace. You let your hand slide into your blanket, and you listen, not to the keys, but to the silence they've left behind. You remember Arabella and her affirmations. Frederick and his numbers. Harmon and his dream gibberish. Bellwright and her sleepy prompts. Cadwell and his machine lull, all of them, across time, across continents, whispering the same thing: you don't need to win at sleep. You only need to show up for it, the rest will come. And now, the carriage has stopped, the ribbon has stilled, your thoughts move like syrup, slow and soft and just a little sweet. There's no pressure. No pages left to fill. No right words. No wrong ones. Just this moment, the room has gone quiet in the gentlest way. Not empty, but patient. Outside, maybe there's wind. Or a car passing. Or rain tapping on a window like it wants to be let in. But you don't need to answer. Not now, you've done enough, the keys are at rest, and so are you. Your body has found its place, your head sinking just a little deeper into the pillow, your breath a little heavier, like it's carrying a secret you no longer need to say out loud. You're floating somewhere between remembering and forgetting. Between effort and ease, between the last word and the next dream. Let that space hold you, let it cradle the weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. There's nothing more to figure out. No more numbers to type. No more patterns to repeat. You're here, still, ready, and so, when you're ready, when the silence wraps all the way around you like warm fabric, close your eyes, let go of the page, let the night take over. Sleep will arrive when it is ready, and when it does, you'll already be home.